Time, I'm actually limited for time today, so probably gonna have to stop at like around 9:45. My idea, Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, is that we kind of try to zoom to this as much as possible, just get the basics, and then maybe the next class have like a brief presentation of the fiqh of fasting, which will some of the stuff will overlap, and then whatever questions they are, just deal with them on the WhatsApp group, because time is not on our side really, at this point. So the Shaykh, Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, he goes into the adab of fasting, or the etiquettes of fasting. And he says that there are 6 etiquettes. And from these, we covered some before. We covered 2 of them last time that we met. And the first is to preserve the tongue. And the externals, or basically your body, from doing actions or performing actions which go against the deen. And he bases that on the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is narrated in Bukhari, in which he says, "Man lam yada' qawl az-zuri wal 'amal bih, falaysa lillahi hajatun an yada'a ta'amah wa sharabah." That the person that does not cease or desist to engage in false testimony. False testimony can even be to be supportive of life. But here, false testimony has a big, Qawl az-zur has a big, there's a big discussion on it in the books of fiqh, because it even goes to the issue of false witnessing. But in general, it's being a person that's supportive of lies in what they're saying, and acting upon falsehoods, right? So some of the ulama, they take Qawl az-zur, or the false testimony, false statement, to imply falsehood overall. Some of them limit the meaning to a very specific meaning. But in the spiritual sense, they look at the general meaning, or the wider meaning, because they're talking about how that fits into the adab, or the etiquette of fasting. So the school of fasting, or the school of Ramadan overall, what it's aiming at is trying to teach us what Islam means on every level for us. And it's kind of like an intensive course on Islam, theoretically and practically, so that we begin to reform ourselves. So it's okay if we go into Ramadan as sinners. The thing is, coming out of Ramadan as much as possible, detaching. And if we fail, we come back and we try again. We keep trying. You never give up. Never lose hope, even if we're engaged in sins that are continuous. But it's important to understand that we have to keep making an effort, because the effort is what's counting. At a certain point, then we're relying on intention, because our actions are insufficient. Right? So at least we have the intention to come close to Allah Ta'ala, even if we're drowning in sin. So we don't ever want to let shaitan trick us in being of the mind that because we're continuing in our sin and we're drowning in our sin, that we give up, because then at that point it's a done deal. So the school of Ramadan overall is predicated on that concept of a perpetual battle with ourselves for self-reformation, so that we're in conformity with the will of Allah Ta'ala, as is spelled out in the legislation of Islam. Because when we talk about what is the will of Allah, that becomes cloudy if we don't have some sort of way to define that. Right? That's defined in the halal and haram for the most part. Some people say, that's you're just getting into the right and wrong. In this age, that's not light. Because it's like the do's and the don'ts. Say the religion is not do's and don'ts. A fundamental aspect of religion is do's and don'ts, but there's a higher level to that. Right? The way that a child understands the do's and the don'ts is going to be different than an adult, inshallah. But still, you have to have boundaries. So when he says, يعني حفظ اللسان والجوارح عن المخالفة, يعني protecting our tongue, he separates out the tongue because the tongue has a special place. In the sense of the tongue has a special role in leading us to the hellfire, right? The tongue also has that role of leading us to Jannah because it's by the testimony of the tongue when we say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. That testimony is with the tongue. It's not complete with the tongue, but fundamental part of it is with the tongue. It has to be also it also has to be ascertained to or acknowledged, or one has to be convinced with the heart, and then we have to practice on it. Action is essential. But here he mentioned in the point that from the adab of Ramadan is to protect the tongue and to what? To protect our bodies, our very limbs, every aspect of our body from what? Going against the deen. And so here it showed that Allah is not in need of the person that's not transforming. And that since Allah is not in need in general of any of us, right? But the fast is the occasion in which Allah is showing that the mercy of Allah is there. One of the occasions in which dua mustajab is mustajab. Mustajab means that is answered is when the person is fasting. Another occasion is when the person is a just ruler. And another occasion is when the person is oppressed. So that designates the quality of this period of fasting in general, but specifically Ramadan. So that's the adab, the protection of the tongue and the body from going against aspects of the deen. And that's why we always have to remind ourselves. The Shaykh, they bring that point up. We have to talk to ourselves, because it's a process. We have to talk to ourselves and remind ourselves of the reality of the dunya. We have to remind ourselves of the struggle that we're in, because there's a time sometimes when the situation overpowers us, especially when you're engaging with people that you're in an intimate relationship with, like spousal conflict or friends. Sometimes when people are clashing. Sometimes those moments, they catch us off guard, and then we engage in behavior which is we wouldn't even see ourselves in that situation, but somehow we find ourselves in that situation. Right? So it takes a constant conversation with ourselves. Constant conversation with ourselves. That conversation has to be continued, because the waswas of shaitan, or the whisperings of shaitan and the shayateen are continuous. So we need to be there giving that da'wah to ourselves. Right? And that's important. So the tongue should be employed in the dhikr of Allah, rather than engaging in falsehood or false testimony or abusing people and that type of thing. Using people with our tongue. And then the actions of the body should be that which everything should lead us. Remember, we live in a society in which the dhikr of Allah is not always there. It's dependent upon our own activity. Sometimes we use technology when we have, the adhan on the phone or whatever. And some of us are in situations which we can't even express that adhan, right? We see the phone light up. So then it's really a situation of what they call ghafla. It's a situation where there's a lack of the remembrance of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. And the Muslim in this type of environment is very dependent upon individual effort. And individual effort doesn't always carry us. We fail. That's why the community is necessitated.
So ghafla means what?
Ghafla is absent-mindedness or the lack of the dhikr of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. It's close to a state of kufr in some senses. Not exactly a state of kufr, but sometimes the ghafla is attributed to the person that is in the state of kufr.
So it's an individual level, it's not a communal level?
It could be at a communal level. A forgetfulness of certain responsibilities. And then in that event, that's where the revival of the deen is mandated. When we talk about reviving the deen, we're not talking about bringing something new. We're talking about uh, resuscitating something which has fallen into what? Into lack of practice. The state where there is no practice on that thing. So the biggest remembrance, some of them shaykh, they make this point, the best dhikr is the action of a person based upon knowledge. Right. So yeah, we do, and there is communal ghafla. There is communal ghafla on a lot of levels. You know, just like there's communal responsibilities and individual responsibilities. There's also the remembrance of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala at the individual level and at the collective level. Right? It's like voices, the adhan, part of the issue of the adhan is that it's a sign really to remind that people, but you know, the adhan in our society is more symbolic. You know, it's more symbolic than it is really fulfilling its purpose, which is to notify the people. So the second is that if a person, right, is invited to fast, and he's fasting, so then that person should, you know, openly say that, you know, I'm fasting. And that's predicated upon the statement of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِذَا دُعِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ إِلَى طَعَامٍ وَهُوَ, this, something missing here. وهو صائم فليقول إني صائم. So إذا دعي أحدكم إلى طعام وهو صائم فليقول إني صائم. So if a person is invited to eat and he's in the state of fasting, they tell the person, I'm fasting. Okay. So he's mentioning that as an excuse because what is within the character of the Muslim to not what? Reject invitations and also to give invitations. We're communal people. We're always bringing people together, especially, you know, at the ma'idah, so to speak. You know, at the table to eat. We love to share. We talked about that last time. The third, adab, is to make dua after fasting. And I mentioned the dua that everybody knows, Allahumma laka sumt wa ala rizqika aftart. Oh Allah, for you I have fasted, and with your rizq or with your provision I break my fast. And that's said after the fast is broken. That's said after the fast is broken. During that time too, it's a time, you know, where people, or at least right before, people engage in the ibadah of making dua for others. And so then the fourth is, how do we break the fast? With what? And there's three things. First is the rutab. Rutab is a date, but it's in its what? In the state prior to what we see. What we see is the right thing. But prior to that, it's like, you know, the way that a pear looks. It's kind of similar to that, for lack of a better example. It would be like a green, the state of the pear, when it's green, before it's turning colors and it's ripening up. So the temper, what we see, what we usually have like this is, it's kind of like the apricot is the temper. So first, it would be to break the fast with that, if not to break the fast with the date, and then if not with water. And that's based on the practice of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's done before, the breaking of the fast is done before praying. A lot of time should be wasted on that, but one of the reasons is because the sunnah is to speedily break the fast. Of course, that's upon what is predicated upon ensuring that the time is in, not just calendar time, right? Ensuring that the time is in properly, right? not just calendar time, because sometimes the calendar could be off. Ignorance of the deen in this age is predicated on the fact that we just go by calendars and we're what? Not cognizant, or we're not familiar with the signs of nature. Some people will think that's advancement. Oh, brother, we have, our cell phones. Oh, brother, we have this, but it's really ignorance of nature. Shows a disconnect from nature.
Because if you're on a mountain, looking out there, the time may be a little bit different because you can still see the sun where you're at. But I'm just thinking of how the application.
For the most part, it's not easy when you're in the city, but you begin to become familiar. You become familiar. You become familiar with. You study the way that the movement of the sun, and the movement of the moon, and the movement of the stars. You become familiar. You know this time of the year, these particular stars, Orion's belt. Then this part of the sky, this part of the year is in this sky, and this part of the year they're twisted like this. Even if you're not into astronomy and all that, you begin to become familiar. You become familiar with around this time, especially if you go to the lake and you see the sunset, so to speak, and you see about how much time it takes. Become familiar. You look at the moon, you know that the moon just, a new crescent just came in, you can tell how many days. And the most difficult part is that slither. That is so thin like a hair. Right? And that's why the Sahaba, that's that example given, that the fast is broken when we're able to determine, right? We're able to determine the white string from the black string, but in reality is the moon. It's a slither, no doubt. But becoming familiar is important. we use the calendars, we use the technology, but becoming familiar with nature is very important to be in tune. So, to speedily break the fast, that's the other adab. Prior to that is what we break the fast with. And within that order, the rota, sometimes you may find in some of the Muslim stores that they will bring rota or dates. Dates, especially, you start getting into different kinds of dates. And water, before anything else. That should be the effort of the Muslim. And the use of the miswak. The use of the miswak to eliminate the odor, with the intention to follow the sunnah, and to bring comfort to people around you.
So use it before you eat?
You can use it before. You can use the miswak at any time.
I know in some madhabs,
Shafi'i madhab.
Yeah, there's prohibited time zones.
It's not prohibited, it's makruh.
Makruh, yeah. Disliked.
Yeah, is makruh pretty much after dhuhr.
Dhuhr, yeah. So would it still be makruh at that specific time?
No, I mean if you're going with that, at that point you're breaking the fast. At that point it's done.
Okay.
At that point it's done. But encourage the use of the miswak overall. Just be careful. You live in a society in which odor becomes an issue. Remember, you're dealing with non-Muslims. They don't understand these concepts. So you have to make sure that you have your nice perfume or your oil or whatever it is that you do, because you're sweating and you're stinking. There's a stereotype.
Yeah.
Stereotype that is out there. And so, like I said, with the intention to what? To
follow sunnah.
To follow the sunnah and facilitate for others. But here specifically, I was thinking, when you're getting ready to go to the masjid, you're breaking your fast, you're getting ready to pray at this point, or you're in the masjid already. I was thinking about the Muslims, but I also started extending that out, because I'm thinking about how the workday flows.
Yeah.
Remember, there's something else to prove, the fact that we're fasting and we have to carry out a work schedule. And we have to show that we can perform. And then when you're talking about people that are making an effort to go to the masjid, and they're probably maxing 3 hours of sleep a day, every day. 4 days or whatever. I mean 4 hours. You have to be on your P's and Q's of professionality. And also to delay the suhoor as much as possible to the time of Fajr. Close as possible to the time of Fajr.
Would that still be under the 5th or?
Yeah,
is it?
it's still, no, it's under the 6th, sorry.
Okay.
No, it's 5th and 6th, he combined. 5th and 6th, he combined the two. And that's predicated upon the statement of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that's related in Bukhari and Muslim, in which he said, "Tasahharu فَإِنَّ فِي السُّحُورِ barakah." That there's barakah in the suhoor, in the pre-dawn fast. The pre-dawn meal, preparing for the fast. Drinking water becomes essential as well, very essential. And then there's another narration that's in Bukhari and Muslim as well. وَلَا يَزَالُ النَّاسُ بِخَيْرٍ مَا عَجَّلُوا الْفِطْرَةِ. The people are in a good state as long as what? They speedily break their fast. And there's joy in that. There's another hadith, the strength of it is questionable. Some of them say that it's weak, but the meaning is kind of related to what came before, and it is related in Ahmed and Tirmidhi. And the hadith is that قال Allah is supposed to be hadith Qudsi. قال الله عز وجل أحب عبادي إلي أجلهم فطرة. That those who are most beloved to Allah from the worshippers, or the worshipper that's most beloved to Allah, is the one who speedily breaks the fast. And that there's a benz وإنما أخر السهورة ليتقوى به على الصوم. So the delay of you can eat the suhoor when you up, but really the sunnah is to try to bring it as close to Fajr, because you're predicating your physical strength off of that. So here it's about balancing, not extremes, it's about balancing it up, because you are eating something, but it's regimented. And there's some other points, that regarding something, but that's sufficient. So, what is abstained from, or what is something that we should not engage in? Or what are those things which should not be engaged in? That's the section that we're dealing with now. There are a number of things. One is the continuous fast. Fasting 24 hours, straight without a break. Fasting continuously without breaking. That type of fast is not from the Sunnah. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam engaged in that, but that's not engaged in that type of fast. But that's not something that is what for the believers on average. The other issue is the issue of kissing one's spouse. Kissing on the lips is considered a sexual act. Kissing on the forehead and on the cheek and so on and so forth is not so much considered a sexual act. It's what you call muqaddimat al-jima', and basically foreplay, that type of thing. So Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل وهو صائم. He used to kiss her, he was fasting, ويبشر وهو صائم, ولكنه أملكهم لأربه. Then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to come close to her, in intimate way, and kiss her. But he was one that had control over his basically sexual organs, in a nice way. We say that. And so they mentioned فَمَنْ كَانَ شَيْخًا يَعْمِنُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ مِنْ تَحْرِيكِ الشَّهْوَةِ. So that person, the person that's aged up in age, and he's able to control his, his desire from being excited, and there's no issue in that case if he's able to protect his fast from being corrupted. But if the person is younger and doesn't have that type of control, then don't put yourself in that situation. Especially married brothers, then they find themselves, violating the fast, at that point in time. Because they took themselves there to that level where they sexually incite themselves and they have no control over themselves, and then they find themselves wanting to complete the sexual act. There's no shame in talking about that. I mean, the deen is clear on that point. We don't hide about those things. There's guidance in that stuff. So, it's telling us, the thing about it is we're going into summertime. And we talked about the Yama Ashir al-Shabab, the hadith in which the Prophet Muhammad is encouraging the youth to get married because it's is that which allows some sort of control over the sight. Right? It allows one to filter what's being seen. When people are married, then they have a recourse. Ramadan. The Ramadan, if one is struggling, it's allowable. Early on, it was not allowable to have intimate intercourse with one's spouse. Right? In the earlier phase of Islamic religion. Later on, it became allowable. So the nighttime is allowable. Right? But the thing about that is that, it's the issue of balance. Right? It's one of balance. So the issue of balance comes in where we're trying to spend this time in ibadah. But, there's no shame in that. You have to talk about that. Why? Because it's summertime. It's going to be summertime. And sometimes in the beginning, the fasting has an opposite effect. Rather than being wijah, we talked about the issue of wijah, it acts as a castration of the sexual energy, so to speak. Sometimes it incites the sexual energy. Right? And that's why stimulants, you have to be careful with, like coffee. Our people, they love tea and they love coffee and this and that. And so stimulants and being worn out, you're being worn out. You get little sleep, that stuff, all that stuff that we have to teach the youth that. That stuff, it encourages sexual desire. It's not, sexual desire is not bad, but we're talking about being in an environment in which people like to take off their clothes during that time of the year. You know what I'm saying? And, you're coming all out of spring where everything wants to blossom and bloom and multiply. That type of thing. So here you see the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the best of example. He kissed his spouse and all that, but at the same time our mother is teaching us, but look who he was. Don't try to play superhero. That type of thing. Don't be the Superman type. Because the Prophet was a prophet. He wasn't some extraordinary being, that is beyond normal. He had normal instincts and normal wants and desires, but he had guidance, and he was the one that was most possessed of those things. But sometimes we like to imagine the impossible. We go into the fantasy world and we forget we're human beings. We're human beings. Sometimes you test a human being in certain ways, and the human being responds. Sometimes in a bad way. So don't put yourself in that type of situation. Don't put yourself in that type of situation at all. We have to teach the youth that. So that comes within the meaning. فمن كان شيخا يأمنه على نفسه من تحريك الشهوة وإفساد الصوم فلا بأس بها وإن كان شابا لا يأمن ذلك كرهت له لما فيها من تعريض العبادة للإفساد والمخاطرة بها. So that's the issue there, that don't if a person is young, don't take yourself beyond the limits. That's dislike to engage in those type of acts. Like for instance, hugging closely and kissing to corruption. It exposes the act of ibadah to corruption, and also it puts it at risk, puts you at risk. from violating the fast itself. Another thing which it mentioned the issue of kohul, the ulama, kohul, the ulama, they differ on that. Some of them say it's allowable, some of them say that it's not allowable, some of them say that it's better to leave it. Some of them were under the impression that the kohul, it goes into the ducts and therefore it's feeding. And some of them said no, it's not.
So in that sense, for women, would makeup be allowable? For women, would makeup be issue?
Well, the kohul is here in the eye ducts.
Sure, but
That's
like,
where the
like lipstick or makeup or...
but lipstick is not. Lipstick in general, makeup in general really is supposed to be for the spouse.
Okay.
But our sisters, alhamdulillah, they,
Okay.
they engage. I mean, it's very hard to control sometimes those type of things. But that doesn't vitiate the fast. That here we're talking about the vitiating the fast.
Yeah, but you could make the sense that maybe, lipstick might go into your mouth or something like that.
Yeah, but the thing about it is that they're masters at that.
Okay.
They have to be responsible for that too.
Yeah.
Because then you start, from the beginning, that's not something that's liked, to wear makeup in public like that. But the sisters, they do it. So the thing about it is that, then after that, you don't want to become a control freak.
Yeah.
They have to be the ones that have to be cautious on that point. From the beginning, it's not a right approach.
Okay.
The issue, it's true, anything can go, like using toothpaste.
Right.
It's allowable, but you use toothpaste, there's a possibility that you swallow. Same thing with the miswak. Allahu alam, it's. So there are differences of opinion about it because of those type of concepts. Really, the question is, where is the clear evidence to say that it's forbidden? Okay. It was a lot of speculation regarding whether if you put it on the eye duct, does it go into the system? Oh. That was kind of the concept. That was the idea. So the fifth is, okay, this is more important, is to be wary or be cautious in making wudu and doing istinshaq. Sniffing the water up the nose when you make wudu. Not to exaggerate on that point. That's more important than the other issue. And the proof for that is there's a proof that's evident. Evident in the sense is that it's making clear the point. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم للعقيد بن صبرة أسبغ الوضوء وخلل بين الأصابع وبالغ في الاستنشاق إلا أن تكون صائما. So in that case, perfect your wudu, and then you interlace the fingers, the fingers of one hand with the fingers of another hand, and be generous in your making istinshaq. I'm exaggerating a little in the way that I'm translating, but what comes afterwards, except in the case of your fasting. Except in the case of your fasting. فَنَهَانَ الْمُبَالَغَةِ. So the hadith is the indication that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is pretty much prohibiting the emphasis at this point of the action. Because before, I'm trying to find a good translation for it. Before the fast, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or outside of the fast, actually, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is emphasizing perfect the act, but exaggerate a little bit with it. Right? Make sure you clearly it goes out properly. So, but then in the case of the fast was put to an end. Why? Because in that case, surely through the nostrils, water can penetrate and go into your throat and vitiate your fast. Most important thing is what's going in, breaking the fast. But for instance, like the only thing coming out that breaks the fast is really what's intentional, right? Intentional vomiting. Unintentional vomiting doesn't break the fast. Intentional vomiting breaks the fast. For instance, if a person engages in a sexual action which intentionally incites sexual desire, which leads to the sexual fluids being emitted, that's something that's coming out of the body. So that vitiates or invalidates the fast. So then lastly, the issue that he brings up is to search out for Laylatul Qadr. Right? Laylatul Qadr, that's important. It's like Laylatul Qadr, maybe perhaps it's possible to say, is like what Arafah is to Hajj. Arafah is like that core spiritual moment in the Hajj. It's not that the other parts of Hajj are not important, but there's a lot of emphasis placed on Arafah as a moment of forgiveness, as a moment of being focused in ibadah, especially dua. Same thing with Laylatul Qadr. That's why those people who get into 15th of Sha'ban and they take it to an extreme, they make it almost more important than Laylatul Qadr. It's not that the 15th of Sha'ban does not have some significance. The issue is that the evidences are not very strong. And even when you combine them together, it's not enough to be able to say that this is a special night of significance that has this act of ibadah. No, it's a special night of significance, sure. It's a night in which forgiveness is emphasized. It's a night in which disengaging from sin is emphasized. And joining family ties is emphasized. But it's not Laylatul Qadr. Laylatul Qadr, right, is that a night which فضلها الله على ألف شهر ليس فيها ليلة القدر. So here the Shaykh is basically saying that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala distinguished Laylatul Qadr in its virtue and in its standing, right? Gave him more significance, virtue, and standing than 1,000 months in which Laylatul Qadr doesn't exist. And then there's differences of opinion as to why, it was called Laylatul Qadr. Is it because the rizq and the destinies of the people is written during that time, or is it based upon its distinctiveness and its standing because of the Quran? Ulama have different tafsirat or different understandings regarding that. But here the issue comes, Laylatul Qadr was of more significance is the whole concept of making an effort to seek it out. Some of the ulama, they do say that Laylatul Qadr can come all the way from the beginning, and there's evidences to that. But what's most famous is that, as far as the evidences are concerned, is that Laylatul Qadr falls somewhere on the odd nights in the last 10 days. Now remember that Laylatul Qadr was known at one time, but because there was dispute among the Muslims, then the time was what? The time was forgotten. Or actually, if you take a little translation, it was taken away. Rufiya. It was taken away because of the dispute between the Muslims. At that time, two people were disputing when the Prophet Muhammad was going to tell them what Laylatul Qadr was. And then, from that point in time, it hasn't been identified with specificity. But what has been identified with specificity is the general frame for when it comes in. Some people have the habit that they begin to identify it with the 27th of Ramadan, and then they go to the masjid during that time and everybody crowds up. That's not right. It's a good intention, but the overall concept is not right. the idea is to make ijtihad. Ijtihad means to exert ourselves, from the beginning of Ramadan as much as possible, at least the last 10 days. But to single out one night like that, like this is it, and that's all. And the people who endorse that, they have issues. Because no matter how much, even here he says, وَظَاهِرُهَا أَنَّهَا لَيْلَةُ الْهَادِ وَعِشْرِينَ, the 21st. He's of that opinion. But really to distinguish it, let it be in the unknown, but make the effort. Let it be in the unknown, but make the effort. So then from the virtue of this night, Laylatul Qadr, is that the person that stands in prayer, أَنَّ مَنْ قَامَهَا إِيمَانًا وَاحْتِسَابًا غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ. That the person who makes ibadah in this night, the night of Laylatul Qadr, that their sins are forgiven what came before in the year. Right? So Ramadan as a whole is that, but Laylatul Qadr has this special significance because the Quran is attached to it, right? But this night by itself is being identified as what the whole of Ramadan is. Remember, we started off by saying that Ramadan, the fast of Ramadan, is that which leads to what? Taqwa. Taqwa from the hellfire. Protecting ourselves from the hellfire. What? Protecting ourselves from the hellfire by gaining forgiveness from Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for those sins which what? Would necessitate the hellfire. So this night by itself is being identified as that. As being the night which sins are forgiven. And then here, and we'll end with this, is the issue of making dua. The issue of making dua during that time and the recitation of the Quran. And lastly, the issue of making itikaf in the last 10 days if possible. Right. I know that becomes difficult, but inshallah one day we'll get to the point where we'll even have time off for that. So the dua, the Quran, the extra ibadat, the dhikr of Allah, the forgiving of people, the feeding of people. The Prophet Muhammad this month he increased his sadaqah. And so we'll continue from there next time. We pretty much summarized majority of the book, what we need. And next time we meet, inshallah, we'll just go over some of the basics of the basic rules of the fast.